Making a wooden clock is much easier than you think, and it's a beautiful present for your loved ones. There are a few simple steps that are involved in making a clock, and you can make it as complex of a design as you like. But first, you take a wooden block and you file it from 40 grit all the way to 320. So 40, 80, 120 to 20 and 320. Once you're done, you want to transfer your numbers of a clock onto the wooden block. And one of the ways to do this is with carbon paper. You trace the numbers and then the carbon paper transfer the image to the wooden block. One thing you want to make sure is you have it facing the carbon paper with not the shiny side up. You'll notice in my other video I showed how it's very easy to make that mistake and you'll end up having to redo the whole thing. Don't worry about the pencil markings. If you're wood burning or you're wood carving, then it's pretty easy to get rid of those pencil marks because they'll basically get out in themselves once you wood burn. So I'm using Dremel 3000 in here, and I'm using this narrow pointy attachment to carve out the numbers. So you do it once and then you sand it and then you go again, and then you might adjust a little bit just to make it, as even as you can. But we're not chasing perfection here. For that you need the CNC machine, you need a laser to engrave it perfectly. So once you're done that, wipe it with a little bit of a wet cloth and the sandpaper to sand a little bit the markings off the pencil, and then you switch on to wood burning. And again, you can use anything else you want. All of these are just creative ideas of giving you an example of how I've done it. If you're doing wood burning, a few tricks of advice is I have quite a narrow tool here, and you'll notice for some reason sometimes when you do a lot of heavy wood burning, you have to switch the tips from time to time because sometimes they get very light even though you're blasting it at maximum. For some reason, I think the tip gets too hot or too used up, and if it's not rested, it's just not going to work properly. So you go one by one and you fill out those numbers, and I'm trying to make them as bold as possible because what I was thinking of is having the design on top of the wood block. And my design came from Kakhlama. If those who know, it's a Russian design. And you'll see it's quite close to it. This is it. It's just my printer wasn't working, so everything turned out in blue. But the reality is the Kakhlama is golden, red, and green colors. The tricky part was that my acrylic markers were lighter in color, and I didn't end up running to get new ones, so I used what I had. Another thing you'll notice is the particular design is I'm using A4 paper, so there's a limited amount of space I have, and if you're interested, I could show you, but I'm literally using Word. I'm not using any specific software. I might end up doing it later, but at this point, you just transfer whatever image. And you'll notice that the ends of the clock don't have a drawing. So what I will end up doing, as you can see here, is I would then move around the drawing and try to add the design outside of the numbers. And it worked out fine. Just make sure you go back and forth just to see that you don't overlap the image was already existing one that you've written. And the inspiration came from, so I was at a cottage and we were in a local coffee shop there, and I was sitting and looking up and I saw this clock. It was a wooden clock, and it wasn't anything crazy, but it just triggered with me like, oh my God, that looks so cool. Why don't I make a clock? Because I had this piece of slab of wood, round wood, and I was debating whether to do a charcuterie board with it or whether I should burn it and make something out of it. And suddenly when I saw the clock, it just hit me. My husband was like, yeah, that's a fantastic idea. So then I started looking into how to do this, and Kakhlama was a wonderful thing. I do have another clock at home that's not made by me, but is absolutely gorgeous Kakhlama. I was like, okay, I gotta do two birds because, that's wonderful. And then so you can use real paint. This is paint as well, but it's someone actually on YouTube I saw that I really liked their idea. It's the acrylic markers, and they're really useful because you don't have to change the tips constantly back and forth. Very convenient. I do find that the colors are not as vibrant at times as I wish they were. Like the red one should have been much more bolder. But that's okay, and this design probably took me, I would say about 2 full days of work. So it's definitely a lot of work. You don't have to do such a complicated design, but then it will be a memory, right? So I thought it will be worth it. And to be honest, once you start the design, it's very hard to not finish it because it will be just an incomplete picture. I was really struggling to figure out how much to bold the birds, but I left it at that, not to overdo it. So once the design is done, You're going to use whatever sealant you want. I had a water-based sealant. You will apply 3 coats and wait about 24 hours in between. And then my husband drilled a hole in the middle once he measured the sides to make sure they're equal. And this is the clock mechanism we got off Amazon. There's plenty of there. It's very easy to find it. So it's the one that goes at the back, and it's the quiet one. So here is my husband tracing the size of the clock mechanism, and then you'll see him drilling it. So we use Dremel as well, Dremel 3000. I can tell you for sure the power might have been enough, but the size of the tip
Or the accessory?
was not enough. So it took us a while for my husband to actually drill into it. So of course, if we're going to do this again, we need to buy
A larger accessory for the Dremel.
or use like a rotary, I think. So this is it. Once you're fitting the clock and it works, that's perfect. Then you just put on all the mechanisms one on top of another. I was surprised that Amazon didn't have any like instructions of how to install the clock mechanism that came with it. Usually they always have some kind of instructions, but it was pretty self-explanatory. So you put the shortest tip, which is the hour, then you put the minute, and then you have the second on top. I very much enjoyed the project, and I think maybe I would do something a little bit simpler. Maybe I would have actually burned the letters a bit further out. Again, the limiting factor here was that I only had A4 paper. So maybe next time I should get some kind of a sketch of a wider one. And I really like how it turned out. I wish there was a little bit maybe of brightness, but there's already so much going on. So once you're done with the clock mechanism, you just put a battery in. And also at the back, you might want to add a little hanger in order for the clock to hang on the wall. And this is it. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you soon again for more DIY projects.